Hi there, welcome to Intangify. I'm your host, Matthew Asbell. The Intangify podcast is where we talk about the intangible aspects of business. Next Saturday, the 22nd of April, will be Earth Day of 2023. And I thought it would be fitting to have a little discussion about environmentalism and sustainability. These days, we hear a lot in the news. The planet needs us to be green. We hear from all sorts of businesses and others how we should be green, and people want to say that they're green. The government wants to motivate us to be green and to develop green technologies and have green businesses. In my world, in the world of intellectual property law, there are all sorts of programs encouraging businesses to advance technology and to operate and provide services that are sustainable and will support an improved environment and our planet. As a quick example, there are 11 intellectual property offices around the world that are members of the World Intellectual Property Organization's Green Program, which shares resources and contacts. The United States Patent Office has a Patents for Humanity Awards competition in a green energy category that they launched, and they're taking applications for those awards through June 1st of this year. They also have a climate change mitigation pilot program where they speed along the examination of patent applications, and they've just announced awards for trademarks that are supportive of the environment. And they have an awards competition where they're accepting awards through July 14th, 2023. So ESG, sustainability, environmental, social, and corporate governance, these are the topics of the day. We hear about them all the time. And I'm pleased to have two guests with me today. I have Diane Artal, who is the legal director for Scale Microgrids. And I have Matthew Karmel, who is a principal at Kerman and serves as the head of the environmental and sustainability law practice. Diane, could you introduce yourself?
Sure, with pleasure. Thank you, Matthew, for having me. It's a pleasure to participate in this podcast. So as you mentioned, I'm an in-house counsel at Scale Microgrid Solutions here in the United States. I'm based in New York, and I support the company on distributed energy resources transactions from origination, development, financing, construction, operation, and also acquisition of different type of assets in the solar and microgrid industry. I've been, a little bit of background about me, I've been in the law industry for more than 15 years in private practice and then in-house. And a couple of years ago, I had a awakening call, I would say, where I decided that I wanted to actively participate into sustainability solution and environmental solutions for the public. And so I started my own practice after 6 years in-house in the aerospace and energy industry. And I worked with small businesses and investment funds that were focusing on sustainability and clean technology. Along those lines, at the same time, I also collaborated with two co-founders via the US Purpose Foundation to bring the microgrid to residential and mixed-use buildings, because microgrids, solar PVs and technology are something that is very expensive to get. And when you're talking about environmental justice, some of the communities that may be the most affected by climate change may not have access to those type of environmental solutions that we can find today through microgrids. So that's what brought me to what I'm doing today and my work at Scale Microgrid Solutions. I don't know whether you want me just to introduce a little bit what I do at Scale specifically. So basically, Scale is really providing energy as a service through microgrids. So then the question that people may have is, what is exactly a microgrid? So It's a smart, interconnected system of on-site energy, including multiple systems as opposed to one system, such as only solar, for example. So it commingles different forms of clean energy, such as solar PV, storage, dispatchable generation, and other DR assets and smart controls that allow them, the microgrid, to operate and optimize the different components and turn them on and off depending on the necessity of the customer, right? In terms of the type of customer that we serve, it can be based on different type of industry, but mostly commercial, industrial, higher education, universities, water distribution, sewage, electric vehicle industry, cold storage, indoor farming. And what we offer is a solution that provide hopefully the three of them, but cleaner, cheaper, and more resilient energy. And then depending on the customer, they want more of this or another part of what we can offer in the solution that we have in play. So this is a little bit about what I do.
Thanks, Diane. So it sounds like you're right in the middle of it, as someone who through her legal practice and her entrepreneurship has really been tackling issues of environmental sustainability head on, and now you're doing that from within a company that's focused in that area. Now we recognize that there are companies that do that are about sustainability and renewable energy and things of that nature, but there are also companies that are entirely different industries, but they have reason to be concerned about environmental issues. And Matthew Karmel serves as outside counsel to both types, to people within your industry and to all different other types of businesses that may have other environmental sustainability questions or issues. Matthew, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey actually kind of parallels Diane's. And I think a lot of people who have ended up in the sustainability and ESG space had an awakening, had a turning point in their career at some point in time. My background in law is traditional environmental issues. So hazardous substances, toxic site cleanups, those kinds of things. And after, a little bit of time in my career, excuse me, about 5 years or so, I said, this is great. I'm cleaning stuff up, but I want to build things more. I want to be involved in a wider suite of sustainability initiatives. And as you said, Matt, helping both companies who their product is a sustainability solution, and also helping those companies who need to be more sustainable, but their product is not that, their service is not that. So, I have built a practice representing all different phases of the renewable energy industry, from solar to renewable natural gas, to hydrogen, to other very climate-facing industries like waste and recycling, and the really innovative companies there that are doing things to mitigate climate change through our waste and recycling industries, to just general manufacturing and the intense issues that they face in focusing on their emissions and their profiles and those kinds of things. And so it's a really broad and esoteric practice that focuses on combining what was traditional environmental law with what I'd say is sustainability, environmental justice, the term that Diane used a little bit ago, which I think we'll get into later in the podcast, and representing a whole range of businesses, from, honestly, individual homeowners all the way up to Fortune 100 companies who are engaged in these industries and issues.
Thanks so much. And I'm really pleased to have had the opportunity to work with each of you separately in all different capacities and over the course of time, and to get exposed to these types of things. My world, right, is all different kinds of industries, but you can learn about these things from the experts who are really zoomed in on these particular types of issues. So thank you both for being here. We're going to go to break in a few minutes. So I think maybe just to start the conversation beyond our introductions, I wanted to ask Diane, maybe if you could explain what ESG is and maybe why it's important from an environmental perspective.
Yeah, definitely. Because everybody throws this term everywhere, but we have to know what it stands for. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. It's basically a set of criteria that is used to evaluate a company performance in these three areas. So ESG considerations are becoming more and more increasingly important for companies of all size and industry, not only those such as my company. And it's important to understand the significance of ESG in order to advise companies, and that's what Matthew Karmel is doing on the potential risks and opportunities associated with these issues. From an environmental perspective, those companies are facing increasing pressure to reduce their carbon footprints and mitigate the effect of climate change. This can include actions such as transitioning to renewable energy or implementing sustainable practice, investing in clean energy, or mitigating your aspects of the supply chain. So those are the typical aspects that we see linked to ESG.
Thanks so much. So we're going to go to break. You've been listening to Intangify on talkradio.nyc. Coming up, we're going to talk about how ESG impacts businesses, some of the ESG investment trends, but we're going to look at how it impacts businesses in most industries beyond just the renewable energy sector from a legal and corporate and compliance perspective. We'll be right back.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you on edge? Hey, we live in challenging, edgy times, so let's lean in. I'm Sandra Bargman, the host of The Edge of Every Day, which airs each Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc. Tune in live with me and my friends and colleagues as we share stories and perspectives about pushing boundaries and exploring our rough edges. That's The Edge of Every Day on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to Intangify on talkradio.nyc. So just before the break, Diane was sharing with us, my guests are Diane Artal, who is legal director from Scale Microgrids, and Matthew Karmel, who is the head of the environmental and sustainability practice at Offit Kerman. Just before the break, Diane was explaining ESG and its importance, but I also wanted to ask Diane about investment trends and sort of the importance in there. Do you have some comments on sort of the tie-in there?
Yes, definitely. So besides the current market turmoil we're in, proper governance and social standards are still a big topic. And we've seen this basically ramping up since 2020 2021 and 2022, the number of completed transactions in the clean technology is increasing for a total cumulative amount of 15 billions in 2022 in this sector. So definitely there is a big green economy building up.
So there's incentive, there's investment, and there's a desire to pursue this. People see this as an area where money will be made. It's where we're going, really, because it's maybe where we need to go, and people are investing in it. But at the same time, there are a lot of rules and compliance and legal issues that put pressure on businesses as a result of this. And Matthew, I wanted to ask, if you could comment on some of those, compliance and legal issues faced by businesses. Got to come off mute.
Absolutely. So it's a wide range of issues that companies are facing now, and so it's helpful to try to break it down into the different subsets of issues that are being faced.
So, if you're still there, can you give us an example? I think maybe you wanted to tell us a little bit about emissions reporting in the from the SEC perspective.
Yeah. So the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States regulates, on the one hand, disclosures that can be made by public companies, companies that are listed on public stock exchanges. And there has been a rule proposal to require public companies to report certain greenhouse gas.
I think we lost them.
There's been a proposal. I'm not sure where it's cutting out. Apologies, the internet's gone incredibly unstable, but I'm going to turn my video off to try to help. So there's a proposal out that will require public companies to report certain greenhouse gas emissions going forward. And so that is one element of this pressure. Now, it's interesting to note that pressure is at the top of the pyramid on the corporate hierarchy in the United States. That's on public companies, very large companies, but we are seeing that trickle down to smaller businesses, smaller companies. And, Diane, maybe you want for a moment to explain, the differences in the tiers of emissions and what the Securities and Exchange Commission is proposing to regulate here.
Yes, so there is basically three scopes in the greenhouse gas protocol. So the scope number one refers only to emissions that are direct greenhouse emissions that occur, for example, from sources that are controlled or owned by an organization. We can think of emission associated with fuel combustions in furnace or vehicle or boiler, those type of things. The scope number two is about indirect emissions, greenhouse gas emissions associated with the purchase of service or products such as electricity, steam, heat, or cooling. Those type of emissions can physically occur at the facility where they are generated if you have premises, and they're accounted for in the organization greenhouse gas inventory because they're a result of the organization energy use, right? And the third one, which is the downstream activities of your company, it's basically the result of activities from assets, not owned or controlled by your own reporting organization, but by an organization indirectly that you affect in the value chain. So, for example, we can think of anything from, just to give you examples, anything in the chain of value with your suppliers, contractors, vendors, and the type of emission that it emits. on their own to provide you with your services and products.
So it sounds like it's like, your direct relatives and your second cousins twice removed.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Exactly. And Diane, if I'm not mistaken, I think the SEC proposal only regulates the top two tiers, meaning, what you produce and your sort of direct implications. But as I was starting to say, I think one of the really interesting things is, how does this trickle down to smaller businesses? Because certainly, like companies like Walmart and Exxon and those big public companies that we're all aware of, they're going to have to comply with this. But there's a whole host of companies that do business with those companies that are going to need to provide climate data and understand that. And so there's going to be, I think, a large education practice over the next couple of years where small businesses, medium-sized businesses are going to have to get up to speed on these issues also, in order to meet these standards, but also just meet the general consumer demand for companies providing their climate change information.
So am I interpreting those comments, Matthew, as, or am I translating that in my head as sort of the tier 2 aspect, in which these larger companies or the public companies have reporting obligations if they're going to get their products or services from smaller businesses with whom they partner? They're going to need that information in order for them to comply with the SEC guidelines. Is that a correct interpretation?
Exactly. And you're seeing this filter into supply and vendor contracts between large businesses and smaller businesses, so that you're seeing contract provisions start to be crafted to require these kinds of disclosures, to even require emissions reductions in certain instances. So it's this cost of compliance, this compliance mechanism, as you said, being passed from the top tier companies down to the ones they're doing business with, and filtering through legal. But then this is also ultimately a business operational issue as well.
Do we know how soon these SEC rules are likely to take effect?
I think it's slated for effect in 2024. I'd have to double check, but I think it's slated to be enacted in 2024. So there's a little bit of time still, and I think there's a phase-in period. One of the other areas that I think is really hot right now is greenwashing. And greenwashing is a term that's used in advertising, which really is claiming that your product has more in an environmental benefit than it actually has. And this is regulated primarily in the United States by the Federal Trade Commission. And they're actually updating their guidance currently on what constitutes greenwashing. They do that every 10 years. So the last time they did it was in 2012. So you can imagine a lot has changed since then. So we're getting, a very different update of what constitutes greenwashing. And we're seeing, this on the regulatory scope, but also we're seeing some enhanced litigation where consumers and consumer groups are suing brands and companies over their environmental disclosures or environmental advertising from this perspective.
Yeah, I've seen that even over the past 10 or so years in my trademark practice, as a small segment of what you're talking about with greenwashing, where brands adopt names that suggest or tell consumers that they are green. I remember around 2012, lots of businesses were filing and trying to claim names like all began with eco. It was eco everything, or green for that matter. So I've certainly seen that, and I'm sure it's increasing.
And if I can jump in here, definitely the updated green guides that the FTC will populate will also provide new guidance on specific terms that we use all the time, such as renewable energy or carbon neutral. And what exactly does it mean? How do you quantify what is carbon neutral? And also the use of those certification and seals of approval that you see floating around, what do they mean? And I think that's a very important topic for consumers to know what they can turn to, and really provide them with the power to buy consciously, because the consumer wants to do that, but it's very confusing actually.
Yeah, in a separate industry, like food and beverage, for example, you see that with terms like organic. But although the government did step in and try to regulate that, and there are controls over that, at the same time, there's a lot of consumer confusion, right? And you see, okay, these terms become regulated, but do people actually understand them, and when can they be used? I think Matthew, you actually had a comment about like when can you claim that something is recyclable? Did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great topic, because that's one of the things I think that's primarily at issue in the green guides right now, which is, and the distinction is, one of the distinctions that's going to be elaborated during this process is, can you call something recyclable if it's theoretically recyclable, or only if it is actually in practice recycled? And that's a really important difference, because our recycling infrastructure in the country is constantly being updated. New products are being put on the market all the time. And so there's often a difference between, theoretically this product is recyclable, but my town, county, state doesn't recycle this type of product, or if it hit the recycling facility, it wouldn't actually get separated out, or there's no actual end market for this product to be recycled into something new. And so that's one of the issues that I think is really easy for people to grasp, that is being considered during this Green Guides update, of what is this difference between theoretical and actual, and what can be the basis of an actual claim.
Thanks. That's great. We're gonna go to break now. When we come back, we're gonna talk a little bit about environmental justice and some other areas. So you've been listening to Intangify on talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
In a post-COVID world, you may have many unanswered questions regarding your health. Are you looking to live a healthier lifestyle? Do you have a desire to learn more about mental health and enhance your quality of life? Or do you just want to participate in self-understanding and awareness? I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each Thursday, I will tackle these questions and work to enlighten you. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will be frank about health to advocate for all of us.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Intangify. I'm your host, Matthew Asbell. Our guests are Diane Artal from Scale Microgrids and Matthew Karmel from Buffett Kerman's Environmental and Sustainability Practice. Matthew looks like he dropped off due to an internet issue, so hopefully he'll be back in a minute. But I wanted to ask Diane if you could maybe comment on what environmental justices are.
Yes, definitely. So environmental justice is really making sure that everyone in a specific sector or area has access to the same rights when it comes to environmental welfare. For example, I'm going to take the example of New Jersey, for example, that's 2 years ago passed its first environmental justice law. Now there are talks about whether or not a new gas-fired power plant should advance in the state of New Jersey, close to Newark, and how this will affect the population that already lives in this area, right? And so this is a topic that is of great importance because usually you find gas-fired power plants, sewage facility, recycling facility in areas that are more poor areas, low income communities. So that's number one. Number two as well is the access to electricity, water, food, etc., and how those communities can have access to that and can afford it. And from my perspective, that's what brought me to come into environmental and sustainability. I really wanted to be part of a solution that can bring energy to communities and municipalities as well for people who cannot specifically afford it, and how we can finance this in advance. And that's what, for example, Scale Microgrid solution does. We finance, we own the assets, and then we provide the energy as a service, as a backup. It's complementary to the utility, meaning that if, for example, you have a brownout and the utility is not providing electricity anymore to a sector, the community or the municipality or even a specific plant, water distribution plant, can still procure water to this community. And I think that's very important, that it's not about just who can pay for it, but how we can finance it. And we will talk later on in this podcast as well about IRA and how this works, tax equity come into play. That's another broader topic, but very interesting. But yes, the goal is really to make sure that those communities are not penalized for living in a specific area, however, have access to what they need to make a proper living.
So it's interesting how both of you kind of got into this field essentially wanting to produce and wanting to build and wanting to support, right? Looking for ways in which, you could get access, right, for people who are in communities that don't get good access or have brownouts, as an example, and not just necessarily fighting the fights against the toxic people or the companies that are doing polluting and things of that nature. But I think is also, as part of this environmental justice sort of trying to make it happen, there also have been lots of fights. And I think even as we were preparing for the podcast, one of you had mentioned, well, you really don't want that project in your backyard. And I think Diane, you were the one who said, but sometimes you do.
I think that it was Matthew Karmel. I think that he is not able. He dropped off, but I'm gonna keep going. Mention that community solar, sometimes some projects may face litigation because they didn't get proper approval, zoning approval, or permits, and there are some litigations that come from the community around people living in the neighborhood who do not want those community solar projects building nearby. But it's also, from my perspective, I came from the backyard. there are climate changes that we're facing. There are brownouts. You can take, for example, California, everything that's been happening for the past few years. And you want people to have access and continue to have access to energy. Otherwise, nothing is functioning anymore if you remove the electricity. So it's absolutely of primary priority that people continue to have access. And that's what brought me to this topic and being involved in environment and sustainability. So yes, Matthew, I think that you're back. If you want to jump in. Matthew?
Yes. So what I wanted to add was, as Matt was saying a couple minutes ago, Matthew Asbell was saying a couple minutes ago, environmental justice is this larger concept that is intended to address these projects that are quote unquote in someone's backyard. And so I think it's another one of these regulatory mechanisms that we've been talking about to bring ESG into a ground level decision. So there are many different types of environmental justice regulations that end up getting passed. They flow from the range of just like task forces that are studying the issue, all the way down to actual practical, technical, we are going to look at all of these factors and try to figure out what that says about the environmental justice impacts of this decision. And then we're going to guide, as a state agency, it's going to guide its decision on that action based on the environmental justice issues. And we're seeing, I'd say, an expansion, a very rapid expansion of those regulations that are on the stricter, more prescriptive end of the spectrum. You have New Jersey, which has an environmental justice law that's probably the toughest in the nation and is going to have, become fully effective in the next month or so with adopted regulations. You have New York passing similar law, Massachusetts with a similar law, Connecticut coming into place. So very Northeast heavy, but California has it. And if you were to throw a map up on the of states that have environmental justice policies, you'd be surprised. It's about half of the states in the union that have these kinds of policies, with a smattering, maybe 6 to 7 that have some of the stricter ones.
And I think that this is absolutely necessary that it exists, and those type of laws and regulation are passed through. So you're right, Matthew.
So I have a question for you that I didn't prepare you guys for, but it sort of comes out of what you guys were just saying, which is, if you've got, let me go by analogy. Okay, by analogy, in my world, in intellectual property and related areas, some of the laws that come into play are local privacy laws, right? We have a privacy law in Virginia, privacy law in California. We have the GDPR in Europe, right? And there's an element of, largely because people are on the internet, but there's an element of when you serve people in different parts of the world or different states, or when you meet certain requirements of income or whatever, the privacy law applies extraterritorially, essentially, to, so that you have as a company, you have kind of a least common denominator approach to the way you would deal with it, right? I have to comply with the Europe's GDPR law, the Brazilian privacy law, the California privacy law, et cetera. How is it when it comes to these types of environmental justice laws? I recognize that at least some aspect of access to utilities is fairly local, but I don't know. I would just, maybe there are elements of, does a New Jersey environmental justice law really end up impacting companies that are outside of New Jersey?
So environmental justice tends to be a local issue, a community-based issue, because it's at its basis, it's about polluting facilities predominantly being sited in low-income communities and minority communities. So it becomes a local issue. Now, it's not confined to those communities because those communities don't exist in a bubble. So you can have an impact to a community, from a neighboring community, from a neighboring state. But the environmental justice laws that I've seen, typically when they extend beyond the impacted communities, they extend within a fixed.
Thank you for that, and especially for responding without having been prepared for the question.
Yeah,
Diane.
if you want, I can jump in and just mention that I think that if you see this from the enterprise perspective, if you are a global enterprise, multinational, you definitely have to take into account specific laws that are passed in Europe, for example. They're much advanced on whether it's data privacy, for example, or even environmental regulations. And definitely there is a trend that is coming usually from Europe. And then that's push certain companies that have global impacts to take certain regulations and adapt their compliance rules globally.
So even though many of the laws are highly localized because the companies maybe in what they're doing sort of have broader reach, and they don't want to do a different thing in each different place, they kind of have a least common denominator approach, or no?
I would say this is more applicable to ESG and FTC rules with respect to what is renewable energy, environmental pollution, etc., than environmental justice, unfortunately, which is more local, as Matthew mentioned.
But I think the question is a really great one, because there is a specific example of this in the United States, where California has enacted some climate disclosure laws for companies. So not from the environmental justice perspective, but harkening back to the Securities and Exchange Commission discussion we were having earlier on, California is trying to set the lowest common denominator for climate disclosures, because based on if you do a certain amount of business in California and are a certain size, they're going to try to make you make certain climate disclosures that, as I said, sets this. So you're seeing it in the climate disclosure basis, because that is a much more
lost you again, I think, but thank you for that, both of you. We're going to go to break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about not only the obligations and risks, but actually the opportunities there are for businesses. So you've been listening to Intangify on talkradio.nyc, and we will be right back.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
In a post-COVID world, you may have many unanswered questions regarding your health. Are you looking to live a healthier lifestyle? Do you have a desire to learn more about mental health and enhance your quality of life? Or do you just want to participate in self-understanding and awareness? I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each Thursday, I will tackle these questions and work to enlighten you. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will be frank about health to advocate for all of us.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
You've been listening to Intangify on talkradio.nyc. I'm your host, Matthew Aspel. My guests are Diane Artal from Scale Microgrids and Matthew Karmel from Offit Herman's Environmental and Sustainability Law Group. We were talking before the break about some of the environmental justice laws, and prior to that, some of the risks and obligations for companies. I wanted to come back to that and ask you, Matthew, about the other side of the coin. Are there opportunities for businesses, and what are they? Why should they embrace those opportunities?
So if we get in a time machine and go back to 2010, businesses were asking the question of whether sustainability was profitable, and it was really funny at the time to see how much of a debate there was about that, because over time there have been studies and studies and studies showing that companies that are proactive and at the forefront of sustainability outperform companies that are not actively engaging with sustainability. And we're seeing that across different sustainability metrics. We've seen reports specific to environmental justice. We're seeing reports specific to sustainability. So
Looks like we lost you. You went on mute. Are you able to unmute yourself?
So, yes. So my perspective is that these trends have now become established, and as new sustainability solutions come online, I think we can kind of take it on faith that these are going to be things that are going to be profitable for businesses. So it's equally important to think, okay, all of these regulatory requirements we've been talking about, yeah, they're regulatory requirements, but at the same point in time, they are guidelines for companies to get involved in these types of things. So even if your company isn't subject to any of these laws that we've discussed, each of them provides a pathway. And I've actually been contacted by many businesses who aren't subject to these laws, but say, we want to understand how to incorporate X, Y, or Z sustainability concept into our business. And can you explain how this law works? Can we use this as an example? Because people need frameworks. I mean, that's the thing. When we're making these complex decisions, sustainability is adding a complex series of factors to your already complicated business decisions. But it doesn't have to be too complicated. You can set really simple protocols to incorporate sustainability into any of these concepts into really any business. And it starts at the first instance, I'd say, by determining what matters to your business on sustainability. Build your sustainability story. And that's really the first step. And that's what everyone can do. Maybe you care about sustainability because your brand intersects with a specific consumer population that cares about sustainability or that's impacted in a certain way. Maybe you care about it for personal reasons. But it's important to craft that story at an individual and corporate level to that lead the way, because this at its base is something that is a mission. And I think you heard that from me and Diane, where we shifted because we felt a call to do this type of work. And I think many people who are interested in building this into their decisions feel a call as well. So telling that story is the first step to incorporating this into your decisions, even if you're not subject to the regulations.
Great, thank you. I would end on that if I could, but I think we got a few more minutes, so we'll keep going. But I think there is part of this idea of sort of looking at the other side of the coin, right? Where you have regulations and responsibilities and risks that drive change, and you have fear and misinformation and the difficulties in making a change that prevent people from wanting to do that. And then you also have the incentive and the benefit and the how to make your business, more profitable in the future, and kind of all the good reasons why you should do it. And I think Diane, you and I were talking about that even before the program started. Just sort of there's this real pessimistic kind of view, and then there's sort of the the exact opposite, like all sorts of reasons to do these things.
Exact. And I think that from a government perspective, with the Inflation Reduction Act, what the government is trying to do is really to give a push for the industry to try to come up with solutions to see a bright future and come up with optimistic solutions. And that's where I come from. And I think that Matthew as well. And so just in a few minutes that is left to us, maybe we can talk a little bit about this Inflation Reduction Act, which is a mammoth and very difficult sometimes to understand, especially because some guidelines were not yet provided by the government. And my understanding is that as per the Assistant Secretary for Tax Policy, Lee Batchelor, published remark on March 22, there is specific guidance that are supposed to arrive in the news on transferability of tax credit, for example, in the next quarter. But for now, what I can tell you is that basically very high takeaway level, it increased the term and the value of the tax credit for many distributed generation technologies, provide eligibility to solar assets for PCT instead of storage assets for ITC, and introduce a bunch of adders. So what are those adders? So basically, you have a tax credit adder when you can bump up the number of tax credit that you can get if you have the domestic content, energy community, or if you serve low-income community. And those have adders to the minimum already provided by the law. Also, there are two other topics that are hot. One is the direct pay that allows certain tax-exempt and government entities to receive ITC as a cash refund on their tax return, and also the transferability, meaning that allows tax credits for a project meeting certain criteria to be sold for cash to a third party, but does not allow the transfer of the depreciation benefits. So we're all waiting for more guidance on this. And I think that, Matthew, this is something also that you can comment on, because this is something that I guess your clients are interested in about.
Matthew, do you have any comments on that?
Sorry, I was cutting in and out again at the end there. I think that, so I caught what Diane was saying initially about looking for the guidance on the transferability of tax credits. And I do think that there is, a lot that we're still waiting to see. And I think we will need to see a lot of, trickle down of these issues and how do companies protect themselves and make sure that they're getting the most out of the tax credits.
Yeah, so I think that this is part, Matthew, of a trend where the government is trying to push, as we mentioned, trying to push for companies also to find solution and be proactive. And while we do recognize that there is the need also to protect the consumers, the communities, there is definitely a trend and a need for the companies and the consumer to be aware that climate change is a reality and that we need to act because passive behavior is no longer something I believe that we have the luxury to have. And that's why I think that Matthew and I had a kind of a wake-up call at some point where we decided, okay, what we're doing is great, but now it's time for action.
Exactly.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. We're going to end now, unless either of you have maybe a final message you'd like to share with the entrepreneurs in our audience.
Well, Matthew and I are available. I think that you can reach out to us if you have any question about this podcast through Matthew as well and Intangify. So feel free to reach out if you want to discuss further.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for being here and for this very thoughtful discussion. I learned a lot that I did not know. So thank you for educating me and our audience. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Matthew.